Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our session, What Your Cash Flow is Trying to Tell You. Today, we're discussing the farm budget and why profitable farms still feel cash tight, how to spot issues early, and how to build a cash flow that reflects the real timing of primary production. We briefly touched on this subject in last month's webinar, and we'll now have a look and provide additional details to assist with planning and budgeting for your farm business. As we go through, if you have any questions, feel free to add them into the chat and we'll have a look at them towards the end of the webinar. Today, I'm joined by two fantastic guests. Micheal Fagg, he's the Rural Financial Counsellor based up here in Toowoomba. He's a numbers machine and unfortunately an eel supporter, but what a combo.
Thanks, Warren. 40 years of loyal supporter to the Eels. It's been a tough ride, I can tell you.
I bet it has. And Leanne Rudd, she's our BRS board member and an agribusiness specialist with an expertise in taxation, business advisory, wealth management, and financial oversight. Leanne's up in Bundy today, but I believe your property's out at Eidsvold.
Yeah, thanks, Warren. Thanks for having me along today. I'm a country girl who swaps office clothes for farm clothes on weekends.
Good on you. Look, we'll jump straight in, and to get us underway, Micheal, I'll hand over to you. Could you talk us through the foundations of a successful budget?
Well, before we delve into budgeting and cash flow pressure, we need to start with the foundations. So a cash flow only works if the numbers behind it are reasonable and accurate. A good bookkeeping system is essential for any business to be successful. There are many software programs out there to assist with this project, such as Xero, MyOb, QuickBooks, even just a manual spreadsheet. Your books provide a clear picture of your financial position and profitability. Likewise, a separate statement of position or a balance sheet shows your assets, liabilities, and equity. Without these basic tools, you're budgeting blind.
Yeah, look, so I guess on that, why is a budget so necessary?
Well, in a nutshell, budgeting is essential to assist with tracking the performance of the business to allow for early identification of any issues up on the horizon, which may impact the smooth operation. The budget is arguably the most important tool in your planning kit. The budget provides a visual view of your farm thoughts and plans and shows all the moving parts for a forward look at business operations, shows your true cash needs, highlights shortfalls, and it allows you to get ahead of any issues to assist with managing any potential financial stress. It assists you to make informed decisions regarding the business. Once your initial budget figures are in place, further analysis can be undertaken to potentially identify additional or alternative strategies, options, and other what-if scenarios to strengthen the plan and improve your farm profitability. The budget is also beneficial to your advisors and supports to understand your business and offer meaningful support such as your accountant, business partners, bankers, etc. The budget's generally a live document and ideally should be reviewed at least every quarter. On the ground, unfortunately, I sometimes find that some producers put off starting a budget for a number of reasons, whether it be time constraints as they focus on the farm. They believe there are too many unknowns to be accurate, not sure where to start, or generally just considered a waste of time. I rarely come across a farming business that hasn't benefited from having some sort of budget in place. If you need support with any budgeting matter or not sure where to start, contact your local rural financial counsellor.
Look, Leanne, I know you're dealing with budgets and bookkeeping all the time in your trade. So do you have any further thoughts to add to what Micheal's just said?
Yes, look, thanks, Micheal. I agree. Like getting those foundations right is just so important. Making sure you've got the most current and up-to-date data to be able to build that budget and cash flow. And, that's the first step and such a vital step and vital for decision making.
Yeah, so why is it that a profitable farm still experience cash flow issues?
Yeah, look, I think most producers see cash flow or doing a cash flow purely as an accounting exercise, but cash flow is actually it's one of the earliest indicators that something's changing. And the question you might ask is, well, what's it changing to? So before profit changes, producers will often see in their businesses, there's an increase in overdraft usage, there's higher feed or input costs that may have surprised them, delay in maintenance, and like those increased creditor and supplier balances. And I mean, that all leads to rising stress and uncertainty. But the numbers are usually starting to tell that story before the business feels the impact. And that's just why it's so important to get ahead of it. And the single most important message, and this is something that Kath and Kim spoke about at the last webinar, profit does not equal cash. And, I get asked a lot, well, where's my profit gone? But I suppose if you think about it, if you're a grain producer who has spent for months prior to even starting a harvest, you're a livestock producer who may have carried stock longer than planned, you're waiting for a better market. You've bought machinery, which creates cash commitments, which are not reflected in your profit. And then we've also got to add, those lovely things of GST and tax obligations, which create major cash. They can create major cash demands, and they're not included in your profit. So a profitable business can still have severe cash flow pressures. Profit tells you how you've performed, but your cash flow tells you whether you can actually keep operating. Or maybe another way to put it is your profit measures your performance, and the cash flow is all about measuring the timing around all of that. So, so good cash flow forecasting improves decision making, and it helps to answer questions like, well, can I afford this machinery purchase, or do I need to delay it? Should I sell the livestock now or later and wait in hope for that better price? Can I pre-purchase fertiliser? And this is something I find at tax planning is a good example. Prior to June, you want to spend because, you might think, oh, there's a bit of tax to pay. But, if I spend on the fertiliser, for example, that might help the tax situation. But what is the impact down the road over the next few months if you do that now? And do you really need that fertiliser in the next couple of months, or can that wait? Another question is, what happens if it doesn't rain? And do I need to speak to the bank? So all of those sort of questions relate to timing.
Yeah, just to visualise this point a bit more, Leanne, do you have a few scenarios you could talk us through?
Yeah, a couple, Warren. Probably one would be, say, a growing farm. So your farm doubles production, you buy more fertiliser, you buy more seed, you employ more labour. The profit eventually improves, but the cash leaves today while those costs are happening, but the income arrives months later, sometimes a long time later. So the bank balance deteriorates while the business appears to be improving, and then there's that wait for the income. The other scenario might be that expansion trap where, a producer might buy additional country from the neighbours, or look at purchasing additional machinery, updating the tractor, or additional livestock. So long term, the business may be stronger, but the debt repayments are higher. So the repayments on that tractor, interest rates rise, the working capital tightens, and then, a profitable business all of a sudden becomes cash constrained.
Sure. Look, that makes perfect sense. Look, and Micheal, what does it look like from a producer's perspective? Like, what do families feel before the numbers start to show it?
Yeah, generally, Warren, when cash flow pressure is in play, understandably, there's a feeling of uncertainty. There's worries about which accounts to prioritise, and some farm operational decisions may be rushed or delayed without proper consideration into the longer-term impacts. Generally just feeling a bit overwhelmed, I guess, about the situation. As Leanne mentioned, sometimes there's hesitation delays with regards to buying inputs at the right time, selling stock earlier than ideal, delaying maintenance before cash flow, because cash flow is tight. So, all things that are very relevant.
So, mate, what are some of the early warning signs that producers should look for then?
Probably some of the most common ones we see is that the overdrafts keeps increasing. How long has it been growing? The paying of suppliers later. Are we using those suppliers to become part of the finance strategy? Using GST and making tax payments are difficult. Are we using tax money to fund working capital? Carrying more debt than we plan? Have temporary borrowings or overdrafts become permanent? And the constant uncertainty, do you know your bank balance for, say, the next 90 days? If you notice any of these signs, generally your budget forecast does need some attention.
Yeah, look, and Leanne, I'm sure you come across this a lot. So what are some of the things producers should monitor?
Look, monitoring is all about, developing a system that suits your needs and your farm's needs, whether weekly, monthly or seasonal, and just having all of that data. And that's why it's so important to have that data up to date. So on a weekly basis, you would watch what the bank balance is, where are my creditors, are they, can I still continue to pay within the terms? When we talk debtor collection, are there any issues that need to be aware of? If, who are you selling your produce to or your livestock to? And then seasonal commitments, the flow of that money coming in. So, asking yourself, well, how much cash can I access today? But then on a monthly basis, looking at monitoring, your actual to budget. And I know, Michael, you'd mentioned before, quarterly. But even if you look at monthly, if the budget is out a little bit, do we need to update it? Say we didn't get our timing right when we first did our budget. We might have new information now that it's a really good idea to be able to, monitor that. Also look on a monthly basis at those debt levels and, am I meeting my banking commitments and I'm not going over my overdraft? And input costs. It's just so big at the moment. So, can I afford to buy before a price rise, for example? We know prices for, everything is just gone through the roof. So what impact will that have in the next couple of months if there is an opportunity to buy something at the price now before a rise? What does that happen? What happens to me or our cash flow if I do it now? And then capital expenditure. Do I need to put off that new water infrastructure that we'd planned? Are we tracking to where we expected to be? And then I think it's also important to do a seasonal review, those production assumptions. So is my crop yield what I'd predicted it to be? The commodity prices, just checking, what am I getting per kilo? Is it what we thought it was? Looking at rainfall impacts, I'd planned for rain, but it hasn't come. What does that mean for my cash flow? Am I going to make different decisions because of that? And also then looking at the refinance requirements because of a late start to a season, maybe, is this causing stress and strain and do I need to refinance? So it's also just looking what's coming over the horizon.
Sure.
You might also ask yourself, which month is usually our lowest cash position and how much working capital do we actually need per month or per quarter? And, how sensitive are we to those changes in price or yield? Because that can have a significant difference in what things look like. And again, what happens if income arrives 60 days later than you had expected it to? Do we need to put something in place? And again, those lovely tax payments, GST and income tax, they really need to be built into the story. But I think it's a good time to probably bring a little example to life.
Yeah, that's right. Look, we've got an example budget. It's a simple layout showing how timing affects cash flow. So, Michael, over to you.
So firstly, as with any budget, we can't just solely focus on the numbers. There's many underlying parts to compiling a budget. You need a full understanding of the business, understand the goals of owners and partners, what resources are available, such as what is the carrying capacity, average yields for the property, and so on. So here we have a mixed farming enterprise, a cattle, cropping and hay operation. So this is a fairly standard budget layout. And as we scroll down the budget, we'll be able to see the various sections. So we start off with the income, and then we have the farm expenses, which is split between variable and fixed or overhead. The variable helps with gross margin analysis. Then we proceed down to personal expenses, debt repayments, capital items, and the bottom line. So the bottom line being the projected cash position. So we might just have a quick look at what the bottom line is telling us in this example. Now, as we can see, there are a few months here where the cash flow may be unavailable to meet projected expenses and commitments. So some revision or planning adjustments are definitely required. This may be to the farm plan itself, to various income and expense amounts or timing, or possibly a discussion with your banker to accommodate any shortfalls if needed. Mixed operations can look profitable overall, but one enterprise might quietly drain cash. Cropping might be cash flow positive, while livestock is cash flow negative. Overheads can be uneven, and when producers see the breakdown through the budget, the story becomes clear. So we'll now look at some individual sections in more detail. So starting with the income. Now, depending on the farm operation, generally you'll start with some sort of schedule behind the scenes to assist with calculating the budget figures. This could be a cropping, production, livestock or wool schedule. And these schedules record the underlying assumptions and calculations behind the budget figures, such as livestock bought and sold, yields, pricing, etc. Assumptions should be recorded for all farm income and expense items, reflect reality, and obviously be achievable. Actual historical averages from your past year's financial statements are generally used as a tool to assist with explaining and proving and confirming your budget projections, and obviously taking into account any future operational changes. Looking at this budget, there may be honestly many options to consider different strategies to change the timing of the receipts, such within the cattle program or crop sales. There might be an alternative cropping regime which may improve results. As I mentioned earlier, discussions are needed and we just can't solely focus on the numbers. So we might now look at the expenses. Here we have the variable and overhead costs. Similar story, I guess. Can we adjust any amounts or timing of payments using a different strategy? An obvious one here, which is highlighted, might be the timing of the annual insurance bill. Can we better align that commitment to actually suit our cash flow needs and the bottom line? And if we proceed down to the remaining sections there, we have the final sections of the budget. Now, given the current economic environment, possibly a third-party banker looking at this budget may have concerns that the personal expenses might be a bit light on. However, a knowledge of the family dynamics would be required before challenging any data. Sure. In the debt section, possible timing options may again be available. So can we restructure the debt repayments more in line with the seasonal cropping receipts? And finally, as I've said before, we need to remain vigilant to ensure the budget figures are realistic and achievable, so we can identify the shortfalls, adjust the plans, and take action early to stay ahead of it. Overall, this example, there's some changes that are needed to address some of the monthly shortfalls, and discussions are required. Apart from the numbers telling the story, as we all know, the most important part of any business is the people. And we all want our farm business families to be happy and successful. So as rural counsellors, we regularly assist farmers work through any cash flow concerns to stay ahead of it. Generally, we come to you at the farm for a friendly, impartial and confidential chat.
Brilliant. Thanks, Micheal. I think you've summarised that really well. If we could move on to planning, I think one of the important things is obviously keeping things simple, but we'll talk to Leanne. Can you just have a chat through the planning side of a cash flow budget?
Thanks, Warren. Michael, I did notice though in your example that there's nothing in the capital. So no improvements can happen. So we've got we're not, we can't grow, we can't do anything new, or we can't develop our farm. So I suppose I just wanted to raise that. But also about unexpected life events as well. So that's where looking at those personal expenses, what is the reality of that, and really understanding, well, what do we need to live? How much do we need to live, and being real about it. So getting back to planning. So planning is about smoothing those bumps. So mapping out the cash heavy versus the cash light months, as Michael said. So fertiliser in this example, we know that we paid at this time of the year. So in Michael's example, we show that we paid we bulk buy our fertiliser in July, November and March. So, can we align loan repayments with production cycles and income payments as well? And can we use those staged sales or forward contracts? For example, your grain, you're receiving it on forward contracts. Macadamias by, more progressive or instalment payments. With macadamias, you might get 30% now and the rest in 2 other instalments over 12 months. So it's really just mapping out what does that look like? Building those input costs into the purchasing plans, negotiating supplier terms as well, and talking to your bank early because, banks don't like surprises. So I suppose there's a couple of conversations and Michael did mention about those assumptions and, having that conversation with yourself is, well, what is my best estimate for the next 12 months? And it doesn't have to be perfect. These are assumptions, and I can say I've never seen a perfect, exact cash flow budget in 30 years. So there's no such thing as perfect when we come to this. This is where it's, the assumptions we're making and, our best guess. So also having a conversation with your real financial counsellor or advisor, about those assumptions. Can they help you challenge those assumptions that you're making? Because that's where the value is. That the first budget cash flow is always the hardest, but once you get into the groove and the process, it becomes a lot easier. And then also having that conversation with the bank. What concerns can we address before they become problems? And
exactly, and that's what we're sort of. The whole point of our series, Leanne, is to get ahead of it before it becomes a potential problem. So what are the things to watch out for? The traps, a few traps.
Yeah, Warren, I see the good season trap. Even a couple of good seasons, it creates confidence. There's machinery upgrades. We might have some increased drawings. We've increased expenses on the farm. But then 2 average seasons later, the cash flow becomes stressed. So it's looking at those good years and, building resilience in those, for building resilience in the average years. So the other one is the capital expenditure trap, where, there's a lot of attractive machinery packages that are offering low interest rate purchases. And then look, 6 months later, that working capital pressure emerges. And, the question, I suppose, isn't can I buy it? The question is, can my cash flow carry it? So, and then I think the other one is the silence trap, where, we know things are tightening, but we wait, 12 or more months before seeking help. And, by then we've got creditors are overdue, the banks are getting concerned, and our options become they're limited. So those early conversations create more options so you can get ahead of it.
Yeah, some great points there, Leanne, and come across all those. So as we mentioned and probably repeated, regular monitoring and review of the farm plan and the budget projections is required. You need to keep your finger on the pulse. Secondly, maintaining open communications with all associated parties to the business is essential. These points are particularly important given some of the current external influences experienced on the ground at the moment. So whether it be the dry period, we've got drought declarations in some areas, biosecurity concerns, or even the overseas conflicts affecting input and freight costs. So now is the time to reflect on your current plans and budgets. Don't be afraid to reach out for support early, even if it's just for a second opinion to confirm your thinking and options. And, a fresh set of eyes always helps.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I think something that I see a lot too is people tend to overcomplicate everything. They overthink it. So forecasting doesn't need to be complicated. Like, Leanne, could you just sort of run us through how simple you can make it?
It does not have to be hard, and avoid complex spreadsheets if that's not your thing. If the computer's not your thing, start with a notebook, just writing things down. But forecasting is about three things, and those assumptions around revenue timing. So when is the money likely to arrive? The expense timing. So when is it going to leave? And then looking at the gaps in between. So what's happening in between? Forecasting isn't about being right. We know the weather forecasters aren't always right. So it's your best guess based on experience, and it's about seeing the issues early enough to be able to make better decisions. So I suppose I like to think of it as a story that you want to see unfold in your business. What is the reality of our situation first? And then, can I afford that new tractor? Can I approach the bank to buy the neighbour's farm? This is where you get to choose and to plan and get ahead of it.
Micheal, what do you find helps producers actually use their forecast?
Well, Leanne hit the nail on the head. Keep it simple and make it work for you. Use a spreadsheet or farm software. Keep your invoices organised. Review your forecast versus actual, preferably monthly if things are tight, and involve the whole management team. So, your cash flow isn't just about knowing how much money is in the bank. It's about understanding what your business is trying to tell you. If you can read those signals early, you will give yourself more options, better decisions, less stress, and ideally more profit, which is what we all want.
Thanks, mate. Look, remember the budgets massively strengthen loan applications. They show management capability, planning, risk awareness, and debt servicing capacity. Banks love to see a clear cash flow plan. With that in mind, our next webinar will take place on the 17th of September, and we'll cover how a bank views your farm. And some of the discussions will include how a bank accesses cash flow, debt, and serviceability, how to prepare for difficult questions, what banks consider risks, negotiating your customer interest margin. That's an important one, particularly at the moment. And we'll have two ex-bankies, Ian Swanborough and Leanne Brassie, joining us for that one. And there'll be a few hints and tips. So mark your calendar and we'll see you then. So I guess in summary, cash flow forecasting isn't just accounting. It's a decision-making tool. You use your cash flow to decide when to buy inputs, when to sell grain or livestock, when to schedule repayments, and when to invest in machinery or defer upgrades. We've covered a lot today, and it's a lot to take in. So if it's raised some questions for you and you want to talk it through, reach out to our friendly team at the Real Financial Counsellors. We're going to have that link up on the screen to our website where you can find all our contact details. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us, and a special thanks to Micheal and Leanne for providing their personal insights. So keep in mind, your cash flow is your early warning system. Your actuals are your truth, and your forecast is your plan. We'll see you on the 17th of September for how a bank views your farm. Bye for now.